Europeans, what do you find strange about the States? The disconnect between what we see on social media, news, movies etc. and the people you actually meet if you visit. It took us 4 weeks to drive from Miami to LA with a few detours along the way and met nothing but good people. Sure, there were some loons here and there rambling about the end times on the street, but I was expecting it to be worse. Expecting is probably not the right word, more like mentally prepared. I get the sense from Americans on social media that once you finish high school you're expected to leave home and be an independent adult, otherwise you're a loser. In other Western countries, living with your parents in your 20s is fairly normal. Do you have insurance? Right? So when you go to a hospital, you'd expect insurance to pay most of your costs, right? But people still have to pay enormous amounts of money just for riding an ambulance and lose everything because they can't pay their bills. Why have insurance at all if you're going bankrupt anyway? Oh boy, have one. Okay, so me and my family were hiking along a trail during our camping trip and promptly got lost. In our attempt to get back to the road, we stumbled upon a really weird place, with stick walls, a tarp tent, a deer carcass in a fire pit, a large "Do Not Enter" sign, and a bunch of other creepy things. We found it odd, but left and went back to the campsite. When we told the family we were staying with, they got really quiet and asked what he didn't see you. Did he? We said no, and they were really relieved and said to never go back. They would not elaborate, and just said he was not fond of strangers. Creepy as hell. In high school, some friends and I would often cruise the back roads of our small town and break into abandoned house and use our video camera to capture ghosts videos. One night we drove by a very deep ravine that was dried up and the ground was covered in leaves. I said we should check it out and see who would go furthest into the ravine. 3 of us went in and the other 3 stayed behind, saying it was way too scary to check out. While we were walking, we saw an empty gallon jug, then came across a piece of blue clothing, then some other trash. We didn't have the flashlight on to add to the effect. We just turned it on every now and then to see things better. The moon was full, but it was very hard to see because of all the tree coverage. Suddenly a cold chill ran down my back and I felt like we weren't alone. I froze. My friends stopped immediately with me. I know they felt what I felt. We could hear a rush of branches breaking and leaves crunching. It was all around us at the top of the ravine. My friend shined his light and we could see people rushing all around us. We turned around and ran the way we came, just into darkness. I'm so amazed none of us fell. We got to the car and started pounding on it. We jumped in and I got into the driver's seat and we floored it out of there. We were deep in the woods about 20 miles from town but rushed home, and all of us talking at once. We had been warned before by authorities to stay out of the woods, that terrible things happened there, but we didn't listen. Things could have ended much differently for us. We are lucky we made it back home. Told the story before, but I grew up next to the forest. My siblings and I knew the place like the back of our hands. We were always out in those woods. One day the whole family went for a hike, early afternoon, summertime, plenty of sunlight. We were down at the creek, place we'd gone to a trillion times. Brother and I spotted a hill we'd never noticed before, decided to climb up and see what was up there. We told our family where we were going. They said they'd follow us. I heard my mom talking behind us as we ascended the hill. Got to the top, and that's when we noticed the rest of the family didn't follow. It's just my brother and I. Well, okay, no big deal. Well, look around and head back. We spent maybe 30 minutes tops exploring and looking around, then went back down the hill. It was still a bright sunny day, hot as hell. We get to the bottom of the hill and it's suddenly really dark, like a massive cloud just eclipsed the sun, and it feels cooler than it did a minute ago, and I don't see my family where we left them. We backtracked the way we came to get to the hill and find my hysterical mother some ways down the path. She sees us and is now screaming at us for scaring her and just vanishing like that. My brother and I don't know what the fuck she's talking about. We were gone 30 minutes and she was supposed to be following us. Through a very heated discussion we find out from my mom's perspective she followed us up the hill. We crested the hill and then suddenly my brother and I were gone. No trace of us. We weren't responding to her calling out to us. We weren't answering our cell phones. Mom, her husband, and my other brother spent all afternoon searching for us. Walked miles of woods yelling our names, and as it was now 8 p.m. they were getting ready to call the police because they thought something serious happened to us. Somehow, my brother and I went up the hill in the early afternoon, did not leave the hill, spent 30 minutes exploring, then came back down but lost several hours in the process with no memory of how that happened. My mom says she looked all over the hill for us, and despite never leaving the hill, we never saw or heard each other. Neither of us had any missed calls on our phones, but my mom's phone showed multiple missed calls to us. We weren't muddy or cut up, weren't particularly thirsty or hungry, so there's no way we wandered off the sides of the hill. As it was mud and briars, no real evidence that we'd walked any further than the top of the hill and back. Just somehow poofed out of existence for a few hours. The next time we went to the creek, the hill was gone. Hiked all over looking for it but never found it. I have no logical explanation for the experience. Animals and people never really freaked me out in the woods, but spontaneously getting lost without a trace for 6+ hours really freaked me out. 1 minute you're hiking, the next you're just gone. The walking things that follow you. Almost every day, my friend and I used to walk in the woods by his place. When walking, we'd hear the sound of footsteps alongside us, behind us, ahead of us, all around. It sounded like people walking in the woods. If we stopped walking, the sound of steps would stop. If one of us walked and the other stood still, there was no sound of footsteps. We had to both walk. This went on for years. We'd stand still and look everywhere and see nothing. Nothing but the trees. Take a few steps, and we'd immediately hear people walking around us. One day, we were walking down the road, instead of in the woods, and we heard the same noise of footsteps from the woods. We looked into the woods and there was a little tiny bird. It was hopping in the leaves at exactly human walking pace. 2 years of worry for a 4-inch tall hopping bird. They didn't live in my woods, but they were all over his woods. It was nice to solve a problem with a happy ending. I don't know if this counts because it was staged, but when our groups of families would go camp, the adults had a tradition where they would do a scary hike or something like that. One of the dads would go off and pretend to be a monster or something to put on a show for the older kids. Being 5, 6 years old, I was pretty scared, and when we were running from the monster my dad accidentally tripped. To make it more dramatic, he said, "Oh no, go on without me." So we ran and left him behind, and I was bawling because I legitimately thought my dad just died. When I saw him coming back to the campsite I was very confused, but relieved. The worst part was that both my parents had gone to a funeral of a father from our church who had died that morning, so my mom was not happy. Was in the desert camping, and took a hike as it was getting dark. Got quite a ways out and turned on my UV light to see if I could find any scorpions. Turns out they found me because, by the time I turned my light on, there had to have been 10 within 5 meters of me. Noped out of there real fast while pissing my pants. I watched this story on YouTube actually. I was diving down a rabbit hole and came across this show from the early 90s that had paranormal stories. I usually don't get freaked out watching this sort of stuff at 2 p.m. during the day, but this one got me. I can't seem to find the video as the data didn't save for me. If I find it again, I will post it. This man was driving home when his car broke down at night. He went to a local diner to ask where he could get help and was told to walk a mile or so down the road. On the way, a car pulled up beside him with a man offering him a ride. The man said, "I will give you a ride," in a tone that was very high. He gets in. Throughout the journey they start talking and the driver starts talking about some celebrity. The man said, when he mentioned the person, he said it was the creepiest feeling he has ever had in his life. The sound of his voice mentioning it was incredibly eerie. So turns out the driver gave him his card, with a number on the back. He owned a restaurant or club. The next day, it was mentioned on the news that the person the driver was talking about had died. He said he was so disturbed by it, he called the number on the back of the card asking for the driver, only to receive angry answers. Eventually a woman answered and said, "Please don't call here again. Was my husband and he has been dead the past 2 years. I can't remember how it came up, but he had asked her had her husband a high voice, and she said no, he had a very deep voice. How the man had died was by suicide. He shot himself in the throat." Woods in upstate NY, infamous. No cars in parking lot, deep in trails. Encounter an old man who stops me to chat. No big deal. He asks me if I'm Celtic. Huh? No man, I don't think so. He says, "Too bad these woods are watching you and they'd like you better." How'd he get out there? I was thinking on the drive home. The rest of the hike I was thinking, what a weird thing to say. Now I think WTF. While at a large lake in my state, my friend Levi and I were sitting in our camper alone. It was super dark outside and his mother and her ex-BF weren't back yet. We were just talking and I saw in the window behind him something move. I said, "They're back." He turned around to put his face up against the window. He looked back to me confused. There is literally nothing. I got up and looked, saw nothing. Then opened the door, just in time to see a guy dip behind some bushes. A while later they came back and we were hiding in the bathroom. He went out and checked and just said it was our imaginations from being so exhausted from swimming. I'm still creeped out lol. It was a campsite so there were other people, but why were they watching our camper? I once took a hike around some trails that were near to me. I'm surrounded by woods. At one point there was a fork in the trail and a sign with an arrow on it pointing to one of the trails. So I decided to follow it. After about a half hour of walking I came upon a very old looking home. This was in the dead middle of the woods, with lights on. It looked like there was people in there but no one was moving. I noped right the fuck out of there and made my way home, where I got my phone and checked Google Earth, and found the trail but no building. I went back the next day in the daylight and the trail was a dead end with absolutely nothing there. It still bothers me to this day. I was hiking with some friends, just off the trail near our camping spot. The woods suddenly opened up to a small clearing. In the center was a very large, white oak with no leaves. All of the other trees were almost in a perfect circle, as if keeping away from it. Staring at it gave a very creepy vibe. We started heading back to our tents, but the hike seemed to take 3 times as long going back. I couldn't shake the feeling that the big white oak was right behind us the whole way. I fixing fences with my dad on our farm in the Midwest. Walking through the woods in the middle of the day, we noticed a great horned owl on a branch directly above us, like 12 feet away. We slowly kept working and keeping an eye on it. It followed us for like 30 minutes. It always stayed on limbs directly above where we were. After we fixed the fence, we started walking back to our truck. In a tree directly in our path was a baby owl about the size of a football. In that moment, the adult came to land next to the chick and seemed to snuggle up to it as if to say, "Don't come any closer." We backed away and walked a different route out of the woods. One of the craziest but coolest experiences I've ever had. Fresh, deep claw marks on a tree trunk. It was in Northern California, so we assumed it was a mountain lion. We were about 1.5 hours from the trailhead. Heading back, there were 3 of us, 2 guys, 1 girl, so enough to be intimidating. But for me that still didn't erase that gut feeling of knowing I wasn't the predator in this situation. Unsettling. That's easy. So deep in the woods I wandered off the path to take a crap, pants down, squatted, actively dropping a log, and I notice right in front of me, like 2 feet from my face, hidden in plain sight among the leaves on the ground. A rattlesnake, I swear. As soon as I made eye contact it noticed and started to rattle, freaking the fuck out. For about the next 10-15 seconds, I continued to drop logs. After what seemed like eternity it stopped making noise and I slowly, really fucking slowly, stood up enough to begin backing away. Once I was 10 feet away or so I felt safe, cleaned up, pants up, and that fucker was still staring at me. Then I just breathed a bunch of deep breaths and walked away. Taking a night hike while camping as a kid. Even before leaving for the hike I had a really weird feeling and brought the small camping hatchet we had with us on the hike. The feeling got worse through the hike. Eventually made it down to the river and the feeling was too hard for me to ignore anymore, so I started shining the flashlight at the tree line. As soon as I got halfway through my scan one part of the hillside started to rustle as something charged up the hill. Pretty freaky to me as a kid. I used to have a favorite mountain trail for running. One winter morning I was on my run and started to see drops of blood here and there. I kept running and the frequency of the drops increased and became occasional spurts, lines. These increased and I got the fuck out of there. Was probably nothing super bad but I wasn't interested in finding out. Land nav at Hurlburt Field in 1991, came across what looked to be an old campsite with a pair of cowboy boots on sticks like they were drying out. Not unsettling, just weird. Hiking in Colorado when I first moved there, heard what I thought at the time was a woman screaming, didn't see anyone else on the trail. Got home and roommate played a video for me. It was a mountain lion screaming. That is a horrible sound from a terrifying animal. Belanglo State Forest south of Sydney is notorious for being the site of the backpacker murders where 6 bodies were found in the early 90s. A few years back I was part of a large, 1,000-plus people, scout camp in the forest. It's a nice spot but it still feels odd. Everyone knows the history of the place. Even the kids are joking about killers in the woods. About 9 p.m. there's a queue for the toilets, so I duck into the woods to relieve myself. About 30 meters into the trees I look down and realize I'm standing in a small scattered field of bones. It probably only took a few seconds for me to realize they were animal bones, but it was the longest few seconds of my life. I was hiking in an unknown piece of land and there was a coyote covered in blood and its neck halfway torn apart. About 3 miles away I found a filleting knife in a tree. That is why I don't go there anymore. The wide range of laws in US states baffles me. In one state it's okay to do X but in another you'd be jailed for it. Also the lack of job security is terrifying. You could work somewhere for 25 years and then be let go just because. As long as it's not discrimination anyway. And the taxes too? Why on earth do you have to file your own taxes? How interwoven religion is with politics. Every president is expected to put one hand on the Bible when they're sworn in. Politicians are very open about their faith and their local church and frequently talk about it. I think the first female US president will happen a lot sooner than the first openly atheist one. I imagine being openly atheist or agnostic must greatly ruin your chances of getting elected. In most European countries even politicians from conservative parties would be discreet about their religion, though this is not always the case, looking at Poland. What confuses me about the states is that we as humans can desire solid matter, food, liquid matter, water, and matter in a gaseous state, air/oxygen, but for some reason we never desire plasma or let alone Bose-Einstein condensate/S. How your election systems works and also workers depending on tips. Wages should not brought up to a level that no tips are necessary and should be the same in every country. They call it the United States when a lot of states aren't united at all, as in laws for different states.